Hello, students. This is Teacher Josh, and we are back. We're talking about the Wild West. Man, it was a crazy time in American history. The states in the East were expanding west. Saloon and sheriff. We've got a cool little picture here of the Wild West town. And of course, the sheriff, that was the guy. He was like the police officer, right? He was the law. And then we had the saloon, which is a place where you could get drinks and food, and people gathered there. Everybody was riding horses. Man, the cowboys were famous for riding horses, wearing cowboy hats, and wearing a six-shooter, which is a gun around the waist. All right, let's go to the next part of our story, the Wild West. Many towns in the Wild West became known for violence and greed. Miners with gold and silver in their pockets would mingle with cowboys and gunslingers. Law was upheld by sheriffs and a few lawmen. Many citizens followed their own code of law. This code developed in the West and allowed for the settling of disputes without the benefit of the courts. Often these disputes were settled by pistols and violence according to the law of the West. Man, it was a crazy violent time, right? If there's no government, there's no real police force, people come up with their own rules. And in this case, it was violent. So you guys can see the word violent. Violent means people would get hurt. Greed, that means people just wanted more, 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 more. That's what greed means. I want more. Um, you had miners. These are guys looking for gold and silver. You had cowboys. These were like ranchers, guys who herded cattle. Gunslingers. Gunslingers were just guys out to steal and fight for other people. Sometimes you could hire them, but gunslingers were known to be really good with a gun. All right, so what else do we have here? A dispute. A dispute is an argument. So if we had an argument, one of the ways they would settle it is they would have a gunfight. So the way that worked was two guys would stand back to back. They each had a gun at their waist, and then they would take maybe like 10 paces, turn around, and then quickly shoot at each other. What a dumb way to solve a problem, right? And whoever was left alive won. That was the end of it. So that was the way it worked out there. It was a crazy place. Cowboys and cattle ranchers. Many parts of the West were not suited for farming, but were perfect for cattle ranches. Thousands of miles of open range were ideal grazing lands for herds of cattle. Ranchers often hired men to guard the cows from cattle rustlers or cattle thieves. The cowboys also rode the range, protecting the herds from predators and ensuring that the herds would make it to market. The cowboy with his horse, spurs, pistol, and hat became an iconic part of the legends of the Wild West. Okay, there's some words in here you may not be familiar with. Cattle. So cattle are cows, okay? Cows. Ranches, that was just like a farm, is an area of land with cows. Range, open range. These are just open fields of grass. Uh, Grazing, grazing land. Grazing just means grazing is how a cow eats the grass. It's just kind of walking around, eating grass. That's grazing. Um, Thieves. Thieves are people who steal and take the cows. There's another name called cattle rustlers. Uh, Cattle rustlers were guys, all they did is they would steal other ranchers' cows. So they would hire cowboys these are guys on the horses right here, these guys. And they would hire these guys to guard their cows or their cattle from cattle rustlers, people stealing cows. Okay, predators. Man, the cowboy had to guard against predators. These were like wolves, bears, coyotes, anything that might eat the cows. So they would protect the horses. These guys wore spurs. Spurs are kind of like, spur looks like this, okay, and it's on the back of a boot. It's a terrible boot, but it had little spikes on it, and they could kick the horse with these pokey little round things, which would make the horse run faster. Those are called spurs, okay? And they had pistols, which were guns to shoot with. And of course, you had to have a cowboy hat. That's what he's wearing on his head here. And you had to have a rope to catch cows. Man, that's what the West was made of, cowboys. Westward expansion leads to trouble. Man, a lot of trouble. And primarily the trouble was for the American Indians. You can see the native people who lived here. And in this picture, you can see the cowboys are hunting the bison, which is a big buffalo that used to roam the plains. After the railroad was complete, more and more people came to the West to make their fortunes. Towns sprang up and cattle ranchers and farmers claimed large amounts of acres. Many times, these new farms and cattle ranches came into direct conflict with the lands and rights of the Native Americans. The United States government made many treaties with the Native Americans and broke them all. This led to trouble. Man, this was a really sad time, right? I mean, the American government is saying one thing, but then doing the opposite to steal the land from the American Indians. So let's take a look at some of the words here. It says fortunes. That means money and wealth, right? And sprang up. These towns just overnight, once the railroad was in, they would just blow up. And literally, like overnight, you would have these towns pop up along the railroad. Um, conflict. Conflict means they were fighting each other. The cowboys and settlers and the Indians, it was a giant mess. And then it says treaties. What's a treaty? A treaty is like a peace agreement between two parties. So the U.S. government was making a peace treaty with the Indians, but then they would break the peace treaty. It was really awful. They did not keep their end of the deal, and it led to a lot of problems between settlers and the Indians. Battle of Little Bighorn. Well, what do you think's going to happen when you make a treaty and you don't keep it? There's going to be a war. So June 25th, 1876, June 26, 1876. So on this day, a giant battle broke out between the Indians and the American government. By the 1870s, the United States was waging war against the Native Americans of the West. Native Americans were killed and massacred. The buffalo that they depended on for survival were slaughtered by the thousands by the United States cavalry with their new invention, the Gatling gun. Man, this is terrible. Let's talk about this. Waging war. That means they were committing war. They were doing war. Waging means fighting in a war. And it says massacred the Indians. Massacre means they just killed everybody. It was terrible. And So it says they were slaughtered by the thousands. They're talking about the buffalo. Well, and the Indians. They were killed. Slaughtered means killed. And the Gatling gun. The Gatling gun was like a machine gun. It was a rapid fire gun. And the U.S. military, they knew that the Indians depended on the bison, on the buffalo. So what did they do? And I'm not kidding. The Indians used the buffalo for everything. They would make their teepees. That's where they lived. Okay, out of the skin. Their clothes, their shoes came from the leather from the buffalo. They would eat the meat of the buffalo. So the American government knew if they could kill the buffalo, it would basically destroy the Indians' way of life. And they would have to be, they would have, they would die or leave. And it was a very, it was very deliberate. This happened. Very sad. All right, let's take a look. Here's a famous battle. Castro's Last Stand. Custer's Last Stand. Custer. After fighting in the Civil War, he was sent to the West to help crush Native American resistance. He died at the Little Bighorn. So many buffalo were killed that the species neared extinction. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes joined forces in revenge and met the U.S. cavalry led by General Custer on the battlefield at Little Bighorn. The Native Americans, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, won the day. So this was a big battle between the U.S. government and the Native American tribes. And the Native Americans score one. U.S. government nil. Wow. So this was a big battle. This dude right here, Custer, he was an American general, soldier in the Civil War. He is hired to come out and fight the Indians, and man, he loses in big fashion. The Battle of Little Bighorn. Let's see, American resistance. Resistance is the idea of fighting against something, usually stronger than yourself. Species, man, that means a kind of animal. So the buffalo almost goes into extinction. Extinction means they almost killed all of them. It talk about crazy, right? Well, let's see what happens. Oh, here's another word, revenge. The Indians wanted revenge. Revenge means to get back at somebody, usually in a mean way. Okay, so if someone hurts you, then revenge would be to hurt them back. So the American soldiers come out, kill all these buffalo that the Indians depend on. So the Indians get revenge by attacking the American soldiers. That's their revenge. All right, man. Billy the Kid. We're going to stop right there. When we come back, we're going to talk about some notorious criminals that were part of the legend of the Wild West. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining me.